On today's show, we are going to go over the outlook on roughly 17 of the most interesting / important wide receivers for the 2025 fantasy football season. Be sure to stay tuned until the end as Harmon will reveal his 2 most underrated and 2 most overrated NFL wide receivers. We're going to start with a category called Year 2 Breakout or Bust. So we're going to go over some Year 2 wide receivers here, which historically, Year 1 to Year 2 has been a pretty decent leap for wide receivers. We'll start with Lad McConkey, who went absolutely nuts last season, was one of the keys really to winning in fantasy down the stretch, was having Lad as he really came on and showed really dominant stuff in terms of yards per route run in an offense which was not the most voluminous in the entire league. The difference now, Harmon, is that you have to pay a pretty penny to get on Lad. Redraft ADP in half PPR right now is around 24 overall. No bargains on Lad McConkey. What do you think about his outlook here for Year 2?
Yeah, first of all, I think Lad McConkey was the best rookie wide receiver on film last year. And that doesn't mean he's going to be the best forever. That doesn't mean that like Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., even some of the other guys, we're going to talk about they might be better than him in the long run. But last year, just in isolation, I thought he played the best football of all these 3 guys, which just goes to show like why you don't pay like any discount for him, because he was that good last year. And like, yeah, he put it in the box score. His yards per route run out wide was actually higher than in the slot, which I don't think people would sort of conceive of him as that player, but reception perception also backs that up. This guy had a 98th percentile success rate versus press in his first season. His 84.4% success rate versus press is the 6th best that I've ever charted in reception perception history. I think this is a guy that, yeah, you don't want to, because of his size, run him out at X receiver on a wide variety of his snaps, and the Chargers aren't going to do that, but he's certainly somebody that can play outside, inside. He can win deep. We saw that as a rookie. And, in addition to that, like he's a great separator. He wins at all 3 levels, beats man coverage. He's also a ball winner. He goes up and gets it. He wins after the catch too. Like, to me, he checks all the boxes of what you want from a number 1 wide receiver. And I know we were talking about it before we got started here. Like, they might sign Keenan Allen, that would maybe push him to the outside more. But even still, like, whether they have Keenan or not on the roster, Keenan's kind of tough just because he's so limiting. Like, we saw that with the Bears last year. They tried to use him in like downfield routes, and it just wasn't. I mean, we'll talk about the Bears in a second when we get to Roma Dunze. What a nightmare that was. But I just think he needs to be like a slot only player at this point. And I do think Lad can play outside, but the other guys that they have on their roster, like, I think Trey Harris fits as a long-term X receiver prospect. Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I know has been like the darling of training camp and preseason, that guy is a legit player. Like, I really liked him as a day 3 sleeper in the draft, and he won in the exact type of ways that we've already kind of seen him win in preseason and training camp. Like, he beats man coverage. He's not the most nuanced guy, but like, he's got a ton of juice, and he is another guy that showed he could go up and get it in college too. So if I was the Chargers, I would just kind of roll with those 2 young guys and see how they can push Quentin Johnston for some playing time. But regardless, like, Lad McConkey is good enough to be like the center of a great passing game. It's just all about like, how many footballs do you want to feed him? Because I love Lad, but I also did not love seeing him like scrape himself off the turf. Yeah. Well, a lot of times last year.
And the yards per route run stuff and the underlying stats go back to college. He was dominant on a per route basis in college also. So it's not like a fluke or anything. Evan is up at 18 overall on Lad McConkey in his top 150, 1 spot behind Neighbors.
And I still never get him.
1 spot behind AJ Brown. In season long, I think you might get him. Again, his Yahoo ADP is around 24 overall. But yeah, Evan, anything to add here on Chargers wide receiver stuff and Lad McConkey?
Just real quick. So Lad McConkey, he played quite a bit outside in college, if I'm not mistaken. One of his biggest or his most common comparison, he's going to end up being better than this guy, was Emmanuel Sanders coming out of college. Emmanuel Sanders very much like a 50-50 guy who could win slot and outside. Matt Harmon, why did Keandre Lambert-Smith fall to the 5th round?
He was a bit of a weird player is the best way I could kind of describe it, because he showed like real flashes of being able to work back to the quarterback against man coverage, but he'd get lost in zone coverage. So like that was one of the weaker points of his game. He also is one of these, and we'll talk about a few other guys here today that are kind of like this too. He's one of those guys where he will make the absolute fantastic catch where you're like, man, the hands on this guy, but then he'll just let like a layup pass clank off his hands underneath. So there was some like volatility to his profile, but I don't know. Like I said, I did a 3-game sample on him for reception perception in a annual post on the site. The rookie roundup like publishes right before the draft. And I was like, man, I can't believe we haven't heard more buzz on this guy. Cause like there's a ton of interesting receivers this year, but there wasn't.
You've been talking them up all offseason, I feel like.
Yeah, there wasn't a ton of guys that had a lot of real deal juice to like win vertically. And he was one of those guys. And just when I saw him go to the Chargers, like, yeah, perfect fit. That's exactly what they kind of need as a downfield player.
Yeah. And this team was 28th or 28th in pass volume last year, just raw pass attempts. And they won 11 games. If you think they're going to be better, that would mean they would throw even less. I think Harbaugh and Greg Roman, in theory, want to instill a very run-heavy attack. And then you start telling me that Trey Harris and Jalen Reagor and Quentin Johnston, and now we have Lambert Smith all in the mix here, along with Ladd and maybe Keenan. It starts to get a little crowded for how much we project them to throw, but we still do have Ladd McConkey here as a good value. Let's keep it moving with the second-year guys to one of the most disappointing rookies was Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of differing opinions out there. Some people out there, Harmon, they're like, if his name wasn't Marvin Harrison, no one would even want to draft this guy. But because he's Marvin Harrison's son, his ADP is, my God, his ADP in best ball is around 30, and his ADP in season long is a more palatable 43 here overall in half PPR. Was it as big a failure as it was, at least in my head, for Marvin Harrison as a rookie? And what do you think the chances are of him breaking out here in year 2?
Yeah, I do think when we're analyzing his season as a disappointment, I think it is relative to expectations, which were very high, not just because of his name, but, you know, in the fantasy world, he went as like a late first round, very, very early second round pick, which was basically like you have to have Puka Nakua's rookie season to justify that. And that was obviously super aggressive. I remember actually right when he was drafted, I kind of wanted to not go that high with him, but then like you project it out and you get excited about the Cardinals offense. I ended up making the same mistake and kind of having him ranked there. And even in a couple of drafts, like he was just the top ranked guy for me. And those teams were not very fun to have last year, the Marvin Harrison Jr. teams. But I think when we're spinning it forward and like we're kind of trying to assign blame for what went wrong, I do think we have to split it into 3 slices from the blame pie here. Number one is Harrison himself. And this was like, I don't think he was bad as a rookie at all. 75th percentile success rate versus man, 80th against press coverage. Like he came out and had a really nice rookie season in isolation, but he made a couple of mistakes, particularly at the catch point. He was not a good contested catch receiver at all last year. He also was one of these guys that sort of struggled like physically working back to the football, which I remember writing him up as a prospect and saying like, yeah, he has some minor issues at the catch point. I got that wrong. They were not minor issues. They were big, big problems in his rookie year. Now I think those are areas that he can grow and improve. And we've seen guys get more physical. I come back to like CeeDee Lamb. He was another player early on in his NFL career that was not a very physical guy. Now I think he plays really well in tight coverage. So that's something that he can improve on. The second part is the deployment, which I know is a big talking point for Marvin Harrison Jr. He took over just right around 80% snaps in reception perception outside and on the line of scrimmage, like as that true boundary X receiver. That's really, really unusual at this point. Like when you're looking at true number one receivers, almost the only guy that really does that is Nico Collins at this point, which by the way, is a huge testament to what a friggin' stud Nico Collins is. But like all the other top receivers in the league, you're getting a lot of snaps in the slot. You're in motion. You're off the line of scrimmage. We did not get a lot of that for Harrison last year. And I wish they had added like one more pass catcher that could convince me that they're going to move him around a little bit more. But on paper, it's the same group. I think that Michael Wilson actually could handle some X receiver duties. And writing him up last year, I remember saying like, yeah, because he played some X as a rookie, that means they don't just have to toss Marvin Harrison Jr. to that role. Again, that's exactly what they ended up doing. So sometimes the assumption of rational coaching can get us. And then the third thing, though, and this is where I'm like most troubled about projecting Harrison from a fantasy perspective is just his connection with Kyler Murray, because Marvin Harrison Jr.'s best route last year, 87.5% success rate, was the dig route, which was also his most commonly run route in his reception perception sample last year. He is really, really good at working over the middle of the field and snapping off routes like a pro level route runner against man and zone coverage. The problem is, like, Kyler Murray does not throw those routes, and it's like, we don't have to be nice about it. He just can't see him. Like, he's too short. He doesn't work. He doesn't stand in the pocket and work that level of the field. So while I think that Harrison and Murray can develop in other areas, that part of the connection is still a little bit troubling to me.
Yeah. I have like 0% Marvin Harrison here, Evan. I don't think that their scheme is going to change. I don't think they're going to use him differently. I wish that they would. I don't think that they are. So I'm pretty comfortable with my fade, even after listening to Matt here. Evan, any more thoughts on Marvin Harrison's year 2?
Yeah, and Kyler Murray is not going to grow at all either.
No.
I mean, and the Cardinals made 0 additions to their entire offense this offseason. I do think that, you know, if you were to like create a bucket like on Pro Football Reference and guys that almost hit as rookies almost hit 900 yards, Marvin Harrison had 885, scored 8 touchdowns, and were drafted like in the first round or in the top 10. Like, Marvin Harris is gonna, you know, he's gonna end up looking like a hit in that bucket. I also think that the context of like there were just some monster rookie seasons from wide receivers last year.
Yeah.
We already talked about McConkey. Malik Neighbors was a beast. Brian Thomas was a beast. Xavier Worthy had a pretty nice rookie season. I don't know. I think there's some context here to be concerned about. I still feel really good about Marvin Harrison long term, but that deployment is concerning, especially when you think about the limitations of Kyler Murray.
Yeah, he was also really bad after the catch, right? Like, he couldn't break tackles. He couldn't do, outside of that one Rams game where he went completely nuts, he was not a great tackle breaker either. So I don't know. I prefer Trey McBride to Marvin Harrison for me, but I do not believe that's the way the market has it. All right. Rome Odunze. So the temptation here, Matt, is to say the Bears scheme, Shane Fraudrin, the whole thing was such a mess that we should just throw out everything we saw from Bears offense last season. And now they're going to Ben Johnson, and everybody's like, it's all solved. It's all solved. Rome's going to go nuts. DJ's going to go nuts. They're going to go for 5,000 passing yards because Ben Johnson is here. What do you think about what Rome Odunze put on tape last year and his outlook here going forward?
Yeah, I do think that it was such a bad situation that I am willing to give a lot of these guys passes for what happened last year, because it was just issues on issues compounding itself. Like, I honestly couldn't care less about anybody's, you know, per route metrics or this, that, and the other from this offense, because it was just such a nightmare. So just focusing on Rome in isolation, I think he had a good rookie season, not a perfect rookie season. If I was to say criticisms for him, he was kind of just average, slightly below average, working against zone coverage. And this is something I got to talk to him about a couple of times over the offseason. Like, that was an area where it's not hard when you talk to these guys from this Bears team. Like, they all can't help but kind of like, not the Jackson Smith and Jigba example with Shane Waldron from the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, where he just kind of came out and said, like, good luck to you guys. But they all can't really help but say, like, yeah, we weren't taught about like landmarks or like lining the drops up or any of that stuff. So that could be something that they, again, just in year 2. And for a lot of these rookie receivers, like, I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. was perfect working against zone coverage. Like, that's something all these guys can get better at. You know, and like, it's not like one of those damning things coming out of your rookie season, because when you look at him against press man coverage, he was really, really good, especially against press coverage, 87th percentile success rate versus press. And I think he's going to line up a lot more as that X receiver in this offense with Ben Johnson. He's talked about that. They didn't really have that skill set. They were kind of looking for it in Detroit over the last few years. Like, they've signed, you know, Tim Patrick to play that X receiver position. I think they traded up for Isaac Tesla to play X receiver for them in the long term, and we'll see how that goes. I thought Tesla was really interesting. I didn't expect him to go in the 3rd round. So they've been looking for like that big bodied type in this offense in Detroit for a while. I think they have that here with Rome Odunze, and I'm very comfortable thinking that he could be the number one wide receiver in this offense, because I think what he's going to do from like a true receiver perspective, he's never going to leave the field. He showed an ability to win at all three levels. I like his route running. He was good in contested catch areas last year. So he's still somebody that was really, really high on as a prospect. I'm kind of willing to give him a pass for some of the production as a rookie because it was so crowded and so messy. And again, this is a guy that like, I want to bet on being a player who can win as a route runner, win at all three levels, not just play X, like move around the field, but because he's the most likely candidate to be the X here, he's never going to come off the field. And I do think his game lines up well with what Ben Johnson wants as a detailed player.
Yeah. Evan,
the Bears had their family night over the weekend, their family night scrimmage, and Caleb Williams went in the scrimmage 5 for 17 with 3 interceptions. So it's been rocky so far in training camp for Caleb Williams. I'm not worried about Rome Odunze. I really am not. I'm like more concerned about Caleb Williams and the reports from multiple Bears beat writers that maybe he's not fully bought in or committed to, maximizing his talents. And we'll see, because, training camp started off real rough and then it kind of got better. And Ben Johnson admitted that he was trying to put as much on Caleb Williams' plate as he possibly can. I don't know. This is kind of off topic as it pertains to Rome Odunze. Just we need better quarterback play. I think it's a really big deal for how Rome Odunze is going to pan out statistically.
I think that we have to be patient with this Bears team in general, by the way. Like they get off to, like they play the Vikings, the Lions, and the Cowboys to start the season. I assume Micah Parsons is going to be on the Dallas Cowboys. He's not going to get traded like he sort of kind of fake wants to be traded. Like those are 3 pass rushers that could give Caleb Williams a lot of trouble. Secondaries in Minnesota that throw a lot at you. Like this, I think the Bears offense could be better in the second half of the season, which is why DJ Moore goes really high in drafts. I haven't drafted a lot of DJ Moore because I think they're going to have him play a really interesting role. I actually said this like 3 years ago that he should be a guy who should like run routes out of the backfield, be sort of used in like a Deebo Samuel type way, which I kind of, based on the usage from training camp, I think they've got him ticketed for, but I just think the gap between Moore and Odunze just doesn't really make sense to me, because I think none of these guys are going to be consistent to start the year.
Agreed. And that's how Evan has it in his top 150 also, whereas ADP between DJ Moore and Rome Odunze is 54 versus 93. Evan has it 61 versus 77 in favor of DJ Moore, which I agree with also. And the other thing that I would say is when you talk about strategy for season long, these kind of wide receivers are available later in season long than best ball. And so Rome Odunze goes 94 overall right now in season long, which to me allows you to continue to pound running back early when you get guys like Rome Odunze at 94 overall, can be part of your bench or a wide receiver 3-4 piece for a season long team.
I will say that DJ Moore deployment that we've heard about in training camp, where they're like actively trying to get the ball in his hands, whether he be lined up, in the backfield or whatever, I think that's like a really good sign for him.
Yeah,
I don't know necessarily that I'm going to move him up the rankings, because I still have some concerns, and I share Matt Harmon's concerns. But the idea that just the notion that they have identified, that Ben Johnson has identified DJ Moore as a player that he wants to get the ball to in high percent, on high percentage pathways to getting him the ball, that's a good sign. Also suggests to me that, I don't know that this offense is going to look really identical to the one in Detroit or anything like that, but maybe he could have the inside track on doing a lot of the things that Amon-Ra St. Brown did. You did this interview with DJ Moore. It was Odunze and DJ Moore, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I remember saying to DJ about this, and again, this was one of those moments where it's like, he kind of wants to say more than he will say, but talked about and this was before I had gone back and charted him. And to be clear, like, I've been a fan of DJ's game for a long time. He didn't play well last year, and I don't think that's like any secret at this point. Like, reception perception is not going to come out and be like, well, no, actually he was playing really well. No, he played poorly last year, and I think he would own that. But one of the things that he said was, I mentioned to him, I've been saying since Carolina, like I mentioned, like, why is nobody kind of getting this guy into a role where he gets the ball in his hands quickly and can run after the catch? Because he's been one of the better tackle breaking and honestly like vision as a runner receivers for quite some time. He mentioned, like, it's sometimes you get you get out there and you're in space and you don't have a bunch of blockers, like it can be scary, was his like exact words. And then I go back and chart him, and he's like that far outside boundary receiver against the sideline, and they're throwing him these like bullshit screen passes, and it just was like, yeah, I can see where he's coming from. So I think he's a guy that needs to buy in. I think that's why they took Luther Burden to push him, because those guys have similar skill sets. And if he's bought in, though, I do think he's got some interesting deployment here.
DJ Moore was a tough watch, even if you're not charting every route last year. I mean,
it's not fun.
He was so frustrated. His body language was so poor. He's supposed to be a captain on the team. I mean, he was getting called out by like Daniel Jeremiah and everything. I mean, that was a really, really rough season. He's only 28 years old still. And I do like the deployment that they flashed so far in camp.
All right. Last year two breakout or bust to talk about is one that we have spent a ton of time on here on this channel already. It is Ricky Pearsall, without discussing how he got robbed and got his Rolex back, which is obviously a huge factor. Harmon, what do you think of Pearsall's rookie year, which has been controversial a bit for, I think, the tape bros versus the analytics bros on Pearsall?
Yeah, so I hate when any rookie receiver misses any time in the offseason, but especially once we get into like training camp. And that's one thing that we have to remember. Yeah, Ricky Pearsall was shot at the end of August and obviously missed a ton of time because of that. He was also dealing with injuries like throughout the course of the offseason. And this was the same thing with like Jackson Smith and Jigba the year before, missed a bunch of time. And it's easy to fall behind. Rome Odunze missed some time last year during training camp as well, especially when you have other established veterans in the mix here. As a team that wants to win games, you're not kind of thinking about, all right, well, we got to get Ricky Pearsall ramped up with a bunch of targets as soon as he gets back. Pearsall is a prospect I really liked. I thought he was a guy that could play multiple alignments. And what's funny is that the first few games where he comes back, the product, like from a separation standpoint, was not very good. Like, because, and again, I'm like, I don't really want to overemphasize this, wrote about it midseason, because the guy's coming back from getting freaking shot in the chest. Okay. Like, let's give it a beat here with this player. There's a lot of context to consider with how he's playing, but you watch the usage for him, even in those moments where he is not playing that well. He's not playing in like Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk's role. He's playing in a very specific role that I think when they took him was a signal of where the 49ers wanted to go. You know, last year it's a little under discussed because they weren't the team that they wanted to be, but they trusted Brock Purdy to run like true drop back offense, not like the Jimmy G create a touch, gadgety play action, like inflated numbers. They asked him to play like real deal quarterback. And Pearsall is a guy in what is a more of a spread out offense where he's in motion at the snap. He's running like all these whip routes and returns and option routes. And it took a minute for him and Purdy and Pearsall to get on the same page. That came towards the end of the season, but more impressive to me was like the last 4 weeks of the season, charting it out, he was just smoking man coverage. And over the course of the season, he was a good zone beater, 83rd percentile success rate versus zone, which is what you want from a guy who's going to play Z and slot like he is. But he was a real deal man coverage weapon at the end of last year, to the point that, like I said, the results were really poor, and he ended up finishing just south of 70% success rate versus man, which is a benchmark that we really want to see him hit. And that was really inflated by those 4 final games. It's not just the game against the Lions. In fact, I actually think that when you watched him the 2 weeks prior, and I think I'm just obviously guessing here, but you could see him on film smoking man coverage. I think the coaching staff saw that and said, hey, we're going to play the Lions, one of the most man coverage heavy defenses in the NFL in week 17. Like, we're going to feature this guy. They did, and he produced really good results. So I'm really high on him going into this year. If he can stay healthy, I think Jauan Jennings is like a higher floor player, maybe like a higher floor bet, although he's injured right now.
Yeah.
But I think Pearsall has the much higher ceiling as an individual player.
Their ADPs have converged. In other words, Pearsall's come up so much based on positive news lately, and Jennings has come down so much that they're basically going around the same spot. Obviously, Jennings dealing with the calf, which has caused, and the contract dispute, or calf/contract dispute, I should say, which has caused his ADP to drop some. But Evan, Pearsall is another guy. Evan is at 63 overall on Pearsall. His ADP is in the hundreds in season long. So as you start to build your strategy for season long drafts, I really encourage people to think through what wide receivers can I get later that I really like. And Pearsall, to me, is very firmly in the mix. Evan, I know we've talked about this guy a ton. Anything else to add here on the Pearsall stuff?
I really have nothing to add. Although, I mean, I love listening to Matt Harmon talk about Ricky Pearsall.
All right.
And I mean, that's part of my analysis is, his reception perception showing that Ricky Pearsall was crushing against man late in the season when he finally, I mean, you have to understand, like, when you're recovering from a gunshot, like, you're not able to work out, during the NFL season, he went through a long stretch where he couldn't even exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising that, his yards per or his targets per route run, over the course of the year were not where you would like them to be for a rookie. I mean, there are extenuating circumstances here. And I'll also tell you, I was getting him in every single draft that I was doing for a long time. I mean, I don't know how updated that ADP is that you read off, Adam, but like, I'm not getting him all the time anymore.
Well, best ball, you're not. I'm talking about season-long ADP, which is going to be much softer. By the way, video team, if you're listening to this, we need to save every Ricky Pearsall discussion and do a music video of many men with Pearsall and Evan talking about him later on this season. Okay. Next category to get to is a small category, but I think an important one. We have two players in this category. The category is called Anything Left? ? First one is Tyreek Hill. The history, Matt, of wide receivers at age 31 reversing career arcs or career trends is very, very poor. That has not stopped people from pushing Tyreek Hill up into the 2-3 turn at times in drafts. Do you think Tyreek Hill is toast, Harmon, or do you think he has stuff left in the tank?
Yeah, I'm sure we've talked about this over the last few years on this show, but one thing I've just become less and less like confident in predicting is like how declines for players will go, because like sometimes you see guys, like Allen Robinson take a small step and then the next year they're just completely toast. Other times, Keenan Allen, who we referenced earlier, has kind of been like on a steadier decline. So I think you can like kind of parse out skill sets and player archetypes, but just generally I just try to say like once a guy's in decline, like they're in decline, but we don't always know if they're going to be, like Des Bryant's another good example that he was just down one year and it was over. He didn't even sign to like mid-November that year after the Cowboys cut him, even though every TV station talked about him every damn day at that point. But I just think with these guys, it's always tough. But what I can say about Tyreek Hill is that I think he is firmly in the decline phase of his career. For 3 straight years, 2021 to 2023, he was right at like 75% success rate versus man, almost like 76, like truly great numbers. One of the best press coverage receivers, over 80% every single year of his career, except one prior to 2024. He drops from 75.8 against man coverage in 23 to 67.3. He drops from 82 against press to 72% against press in 2024. Like those are big drop offs. Again, like we don't typically see that like curve back up for these guys. So I don't know if he's completely toast, but he's definitely in the decline phase of his career. And like for people that aren't familiar with reception perception, that is just the player. That is not like, oh, well, he had his quarterback or this, that, and the other. I know he had a hurt wrist last year. I obviously, look, I'm not a doctor. I have no idea like if that really affected him or not, but just his play last year in isolation was not good, was not as good as it used to be. And like, those aren't terrible numbers, like 67 against man, 72 against press. That's fine, but it's obviously way off what he used to be, and certainly was just not as explosive as a separator. I know he's still fast. He can still run in a straight line. I don't care about that. I care more about how you're playing on the field, and there was definitely a drop-off last year. And just, again, this is like a side note. Talk about a guy just like I would not want to bet on at this point in his career. Even in training camp, he's like talking about Devon Achan's usage on third down and stuff.
Which, by the way, was not statistically poor last year. It was like about league average.
Yes, tell Tyreek that. I'm sure he'd love to hear your analytics based take on Devon Achan.
Facts base
at the goal line. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm getting Antonio Brown vibes from Tyreek Hill. Anyone who's following closely sees that like something has been off with Antonio Brown. Evan has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Well, everyone knows that something's off with Antonio Brown, but
yeah,
we're talking about Tyreek Hill.
Sorry, and something seems off with Tyreek Hill. Also, the ADP gap in season long between Tyreek and Waddle is like 40 plus spots. Evan has Jalen Waddle very high here at 36 overall, but I certainly like having Tyreek and Waddle closer than current ADP does. Evan, anything to add here on Tyreek?
I was just going to say, I mean, can we use this as a jumping off point to talk about Jalen Waddle?
Yeah. I have those guys really close too, just in my rankings right now as well. That's the way I've had it all off season, and with reception perception just made me kind of feel even more so like I want to do that. So something that's really interesting about Jalen Waddle, and I think this is really under discussed when we're talking about him over the last 3 years. Like, this is the guy who plays the difficult receiver role in this offense. You know, he has been snaps on the line of scrimmage since Tyreek Hill arrived in 2022, 77.9% for Jalen Waddle, 81.2%, 82.4%. Like we were talking about earlier, Marvin Harrison being like that on the line of scrimmage player. His snaps outside Jalen Waddle are a little bit less than Marvin Harrison, but it's pretty close. So think about like the role that, they're two very different offenses. I understand that, but just like in terms of receiver deployment, like this is a guy in Jalen Waddle that does not get a lot of layups, does not get a lot of like gimme targets. And when you think about, he's another guy who saw his efficiency drop off last year. Reception perception wise, still pretty similar, like in the same ballpark as a player. But this is a guy that, again, is running the more downfield routes, is on the line of scrimmage against press coverage. And he had 3 other players that were ahead of him in the pecking order for kind of the screens and little like gimme targets in Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith and obviously Tyreek Hill. Now, if it was me, if I was Mike McDaniel, which I'm not, but I would be trying to prioritize like getting the ball in the hands of the younger player who, like, we just signed to a big contract, not the 31-year-old who's criticizing like the running back usage and quit the team in week 18. So obviously this is stuff we have no idea of, but like Waddle is a guy that I still think is a really, really good player that people have kind of soured on and don't understand sort of the role context in this offense. And if I was in charge of this team, I would want to try to flip those 2 roles here.
Well, that's why I thought the Jonnu Smith trade was actually kind of big for Waddle. He is closer to getting more of those scheme targets. If Tyreek Hill goes crazier, gets hurt, he's even closer now. Jonnu's gone, Tyreek's losing his mind, and so Waddle gets even closer there. So, yeah, you can certainly build a case here for Waddle. All right. Let's go to another anything left question. This Steph Diggs rehab, I mean, tears his ACL last year. They got him on boats with girls and drugs, allegedly. Guy comes out at camp, looks like a young Steph Diggs. And, Matt knows better than me, but man, some of these cuts that he's making at age 31 coming off this ACL has actually been really impressive to me. All the reports out of Patriots camp is he has been the best player on the field in a lot of days. So, Harmon, we're talking about an older receiver coming off of an ACL tear. What do you think about the state of Steph Diggs in 2025?
Yeah. Diggs is one of my favorite receivers for a long time now. He's one guy that I just always wanted to bet on because he is an outlier already, right? Like if he does outlier things this year, this is a guy that was a day 3 draft pick and has been one of the best receivers in football during his time in the league. So just generally, like, yeah, he's already done things that have been unprecedented. And again, when we're talking about receiver decline, it is always difficult, but this is a guy that in Buffalo was one of the best. Like you could argue him and Devontae Adams as 2 of like the best receivers of the reception perception era, 2014 to current. His Buffalo peak was right up there. And then we did see a drop off in his final year in Buffalo, which is to be expected. Like I think he begun his decline phase there, but he's another one of these guys because he's so technically precise as a route runner, and that's how he's made his living in the NFL. I do think he's a player that can age gracefully. And obviously, again, we've got to now put the context of it. He did get hurt. He's coming off a torn ACL, but his numbers from his season in Houston were really good, particularly against press man coverage. Like he was still over 70% against press and man, which I think is important talking about him in New England because he's not going to play in the slot like he was in Houston. I think he played as a slot receiver in Houston because of necessity, because they had 2 perimeter guys in Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And like they tried to trade for Keenan Allen before they traded for Stefon Diggs. Like they were looking for something from the slot as they wanted to spread that offense out last year. So I think Diggs is going to play a lot more outside than kind of running little shorter routes from the slot, which I think is more aligned to his game. So I'm not, qualified enough to tell you like, well, he's going to do this after a torn ACL, but the reports are all positive. He was playing really good football before he got hurt last year. And he's a guy that, again, I would like to bet on because he's such a good technician. Like, that is how he is made. He's not like, I mean, Tyreek Hill is a little underrated as a technician in his peak, but he's not one of these guys like Tyreek Hill that relies on the explosive ability. He's a guy that I could see aging gracefully and could be like hey, Drake May's in trouble. Like, he's going to Stefon Diggs here because he knows he's going to be open.
Yeah. I mean, my take is like 31-year-old wide receivers off base CL always scares me, but I want to bet on Drake May. And if Drake May actually does go nuts this year, he's going to bring Steph Diggs along for the ride, I think, almost certainly. So I've been getting a bit more Steph Diggs lately. Evan, any more thoughts on Diggs and Patriots wide receivers?
I mean, I enjoy all the discussion. I totally agree with the Drake May thing. I think Drake May is one of the best bets to take a second year, maybe monster second year leap, and he's going to bring some guys along with him, no question. If that happens, it's just so hard for me to wrap my head around a guy who's going to turn 32 in a few months in Stefon Diggs coming off a torn ACL, wanting to be aggressive on that guy in fantasy. Like, I just cannot bring myself to do that. And that's why I've got him like in the 40s among receivers and pretty much never get him.
Yeah, I do think the roles are set to Matt's point. Pop Douglas in the slot, Steph Diggs in some type of like Z-ish type role, and then you get Mac Hollins, Kishon Boutte, Kyle Williams, one of those in the X. So, it's not great for the Patriots, but it's definitely better than what they had last year. There's no doubt about that. Want to get to some rookie wide receivers, but first, I know there's a ton of content out there. Everyone has rankings, but you probably know by listening to our content how seriously we take this stuff. Silva and I have an entire team of nerds, an analytics team behind us, blending football guy takes with math to bring you the most accurate information possible. If you are playing season long, really should check out our Draft Kit Pro. It's just $49.99. I've been imploring corporate to raise the price, but no one listens to me. Check it out on EstablishTheRun.com. All right, let's get to a few interesting rookies here, Matt. Ted McMillan, similar to Marvin Harrison last year, extremely high draft capital and walking into what everyone assumes will be a ton of targets. And Marvin Harrison, I think, showed it can be hard. The difference this year is
another short quarterback as well.
Another short quarterback. The difference is Ted McMillan price is much more reasonable. He goes in the 40s or so in drafts, whereas Marvin Harrison was going at the 1-2 turn. So I don't want to draw too many comps there. There's a huge difference between a guy going 12th overall in fantasy and a guy going 40th, 45th overall. What do you think Ted McMillan's chances of year one success are here in Carolina?
Yeah, unlike Kyler Murray, I actually think Bryce Young, for a short quarterback, does work the middle of the field pretty well, or at least he did that at the end of last season where I think he played really well. And I think this wide receiver room is interesting in Carolina. Like, if I was to stack the wide receiver rooms around the league, I'm not sure where I'd slot them, but I do think they have a lot of really interesting names, starting with McMillan here, who is a guy that I don't think is going to be like an exclusive X receiver. I don't think he's going to necessarily have that 80-80 outside on the line of scrimmage sort of deployment for like we talked about with Marvin Harrison, but he is like an X body type who had an 80th percentile success rate versus press in college. Like, I do think he's a player that can play that role. And if he does, he slots everybody else in pretty well. Like, that allows Xavier Legette, who flopped as an X last year, didn't profile as an X. I don't think they wanted him to play X. It was just Deontay Johnson did the Deontay Johnson thing, and they had to kind of move him into his vacated role. So it allows like the rest of the receiver room to be, slot flanker types. I really like Jalen Coker as a deep sleeper type of player. He's good, but McMillan's the piece here that really matters. Is a guy that I think can get open, is a really good ball winner, and does work on sort of those kind of horizontally breaking routes like outs and digs, where Bryce Young was just money on throwing those routes last year. And I think his receivers really let him down a lot of the times last year, particularly Legette and a guy like David Moore last year. Just, you shouldn't be out there playing a bunch of snaps and running a bunch of routes. So I really like McMillan. I think where he goes in drafts is totally fine. And I think he's looks like a guy who's going to have a good rookie year. I think he fits this offense pretty well. Another guy who goes later in season long versus best ball, because rookies typically go later in season long. Evan, you are at, I think you're reasonably high. Yeah, 53 overall here on Ted McMillan, which is a bit behind best ball ADP, but certainly ahead of season long. Let's get next to one of the more controversial rookies, Travis Hunter. My question was always, and maybe Matt can answer this, where would Travis Hunter have gone in the draft if he only played wide receiver? No defensive back whatsoever. He was just a straight wide receiver. What would his draft capital have been? Matt, any thoughts on
that and any more thoughts on just how good Travis Hunter will be as an NFL wide receiver.
I love him as a wide receiver prospect. Like, just forgetting any of the defensive back stuff for a second, I think he was a fantastic receiver prospect. Like, I do stacked rankings on reception perception, so every class is stacked together. It doesn't move. Once a guy's slotted, they're slotted. Travis Hunter was a tier 1 receiver prospect, like up there with the guys like Neighbors and Odunze and Harrison last year. Jamar Chase is tier 1 receiver prospect, Devontae Smith, all those guys, right? Like, that's the type of receiver prospect that I thought we were dealing with in Travis Hunter, because he just does everything well. Like, and he's not yet like an elite route runner. Like, I think there's a difference between, being an elite separator and an elite route runner. Cause he is an elite separator. Like, you look at his reception perception chart, it's all freaking green, baby. Like, this is a guy 92nd against man, 97th against zone, 97th against press in terms of percentile. Like, he knows how to work himself open. He just obviously hasn't played wide receiver a ton. So when you're talking about like nitty gritty details of, settling down here or this type of stuff, I think there's some details that he can iron out just with more time at the position, which the Jaguars have said, like, that's why we're using him so much on offense right now, because he needs that time. The guy wasn't even in offensive meetings, which is at Colorado, which is absolutely insane. And he's still this good as like a separator. He's also, I truly one of the best contested catch receiver prospects I've ever seen. Like, he is so good at tracking the ball. He works so well in tight coverage. And then the first man never brings him down in the open field. Like, he almost never goes down on first contact. So it's just like boxes checked all over the place for this guy. Like, I think he would have been a top 5 pick just as a wide receiver if it was me. Like, and clearly the best receiver prospect in this class. And like I said, stacked up pretty well with the guys from last year as well. And I think it's really interesting, like, hearing the reports from camp. Like, I think something that people haven't sort of realized, like, when we're talking about, he's uncoverable. Like, Jordan Lewis is having, trouble covering him. Jordan Lewis is the Jaguars slot corner. Like, I think if we're looking at these guys and how it stacks up right now, Brian Thomas Jr. is awesome. Like, 80% success rate versus press last year. The guy can play X receiver. He can also move into the slot a ton, but they also signed De'Ami Brown, who kind of profiles as a sacrificial X receiver so that they can do all the fun move around stuff with these two guys. I just think Hunter is fantastic. Like, I don't know what his snap allocation will be like. I don't know how easy it's going to be to predict his weekly, usage and stuff like that. But just as a wide receiver prospect, I think this guy is absolutely incredible.
And just hearing Liam Cohen talk about him, especially the Jaguars had a scrimmage over the weekend, and apparently Travis Hunter just lit it up. And there are reports he's been playing in the slot quite a bit. So he's going to get high percentage stuff.
When he was going in the 30s and the 40s, I thought it was a little bit too rich. His price has since come down a ton to sometimes now he goes late 50s, 60s. And at that point, it's like, man, I don't know how many routes. I just like close my eyes and be like, bet on the best player on the field, or bet on the best athlete on the field. And I think that's a totally fine take to have on Travis Hunter the later that he goes. Let's go to last rookie that we're going to focus on here is Jayden Higgins. So when they use this much draft capital on Jayden Higgins, my immediate thought was they're just going to put him every snap. He's going to play opposite Nico Collins. He's going to be out there for every single play. I still think that's the case. Is he ready for that, Matt Harmon? And what do you think about him versus Christian Kirk here in drafts as they go kind of close to each other?
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of like Keon Coleman from last year's draft class. And I did a whole breakdown on YouTube about this last year with Coleman as a guy that was a sub 35th percentile success rate versus man and press player, despite their size and like physical attributes. Just not a guy that separated in college. And when you look back through the history of reception perception, there's some hits from that group. Usually it's like either these partial hits like Christian Watson or Will Fuller, these like downfield players that had a lot of athletic ability. The other like true, this guy turned into a top level receiver. They all move into the slot. It's like Rashee Rice, it's Juju Smith-Schuster, it's like Amon-Ra St. Brown's another one. They're like collegiate perimeter receivers who kick inside into the pros. So I thought that's what the Bills should have done with Keon Coleman. They quite literally almost never did that last year. And then for Jayden Higgins, I thought that would be the best path for him to become a high volume player. And because the Texans have Nico Collins, who's a true X receiver, I think there's a path for him to do that. But they also have Christian Kirk, who I think has some good bit of football left. And they drafted Jalen Knoll, who just straight up I thought was a better receiver than Jayden Higgins. And obviously draft capital indicates that, okay, it's probably going to be Higgins, whatever. But like I think Knoll's an awesome player. He's one of those guys just like I have no idea how to like project him out this year, but he's a good player that I think fits really, really well with CJ Stroud. Part of me almost kind of wonders too, guys, that I think that Higgins needs to be like, 30, 40% slot player. I'm not saying he needs to be, like in the slot all the time or something like that. But did they maybe draft this big bodied receiver to take some X receiver snaps away from Nico Collins? Like, yes, I am taking your Jayden Higgins question and turning it into a Nico Collins take here, but Nick Caley was the Rams passing game coordinator. He also comes from the Patriots tree. We've seen what they've done in terms of like moving their top receiver around. Like, what if Nico Collins, a guy that, like I said, among the top receivers in football is the only guy that plays that much exclusive X receiver, runs more routes off the line of scrimmage this year and gets more of that sort of layup work. Like, then we're talking about him being maybe the top scorer at the position in fantasy this year. So that might not be good for Jayden Higgins necessarily, but again, I'm talking about Higgins maybe becoming like a 30, 40% like X receiver, and then Nico Collins getting a little bit less. But this Texans receiver room is really interesting. I just think that Higgins' best path is to being like a high volume fantasy producer is probably as like a jumbo slot flanker receiver.
Yeah, and one other thing that we could see, Evan, is just like what we talked about in the wake of the Joe Mixon injury. This team can't run the ball. They can't run block. Let's just throw it a ton. Let's just throw it short a ton this season and see what happens. Evan, any more thoughts? You are very low on Higgins, down at 146 overall for you on Higgins. Ben Evans has been high on Christian Kirk. Talked about that on Man vs. Machine.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a lot on Man vs. Machine. I mean, that's the discrepancy between Leone and I's rankings, that I think that Kirk is a nice pick. It's like a wide receiver 4 that you get at a wide receiver 5 price. And Jayden Higgins, to me, I mean, if Kirk goes down or if Nico goes down, Jayden Higgins can become like a fantasy factor. I think that he opens the season as more of like a low volume role player.
All right, let's go to another category here. Some middle round picks that are make or break. A lot of these guys going round 4, round 5, round 6. There are a lot of them to choose from. First one I want to talk about is Garrett Wilson. This is hard because I think there's a separate discussion between, is Garrett Wilson good and can Justin Fields produce a top 10, top 5 fantasy season out of a wide receiver? I think it's fair to question. First, I guess we just start on, is Garrett Wilson good enough here? Harmon, his ADP is somewhere in the late 3rd, early 4th in season long right now.
Yeah, I think Garrett Wilson's great. Like, I think he's a fringe top 10 NFL receiver, real life, 94th percentile success rate versus man last year. He's been one of the best separators since he got into the league. I also think that, when you look at him and Aaron Rodgers, Wilson kind of can be a freelancer, which I don't think is always a bad thing, but it's something that Aaron Rodgers doesn't really like. Also, Aaron Rodgers, and we'll talk about this when we talk about DK Metcalf, was not accurate at all throwing over like the intermediate middle of the field, which I'm a little nervous about when it comes to the Steelers passing game. But like, there are so many times where, it wasn't often because Garrett Wilson wasn't running routes over the middle of the field that often in the intermediate section. But when he's running these like wide open dig routes, Rodgers is putting the football behind him. So that wasn't a great connection last year. But bigger to me than, and it's hard to say, like bigger than the freaking guy who's throwing the football in Justin Fields. But I do think something I'm encouraged about is like how he's going to be deployed in this offense, because like, imagining if they take anything from Detroit here and bring it to New York with Tanner Engstrand, the former Lions passing game coordinator, now the offense coordinator here, it's going to look very different than last year's, Nathaniel Hackett kind of Frankenstein Rodgers offense, where it's so spread out. And Wilson was primarily the outside on the line of scrimmage player, whereas I think he's probably going to be more condensed this year. Like, this is a condensed offense that's coming from Detroit. It's a lot of like pre-snap eye candy motion. There's none of that in this old offense here. So I think that we could be looking at a serious role flip for Wilson, where last year it was just slants, go routes, and out routes from the boundary. I think he actually could be running a more diverse route tree. So that's encouraging. Like, that part of it I actually think is maybe even more important than what Justin Fields can do, because there's just going to be way more easy targets for Wilson to get this year. But obviously I have no, like, Justin Fields not going to run like a high volume passing attack. So there is that. I think Garrett Wilson's good enough, and I think his role is going to be good. quarterback is still a question.
Right. It's just a hard thing to middle. Evan, you're at 37 overall right now on Garrett Wilson, right behind Devontae Adams and Jalen Waddle. Anything to add here on Garrett Wilson?
I think that Harmon summed it up beautifully. I think that Garrett Wilson is a really, really good player. The Jets obviously did. They just gave him a massive deal. You know, he's hasn't even hit his prime yet. It's just a matter of, I think this team leads the NFL in rushing attempts, and you know he has very little target competition. I mean, that's the good news. The good news is that he's good. It's just this team's not going to throw the ball very much.
Yeah. I mean, he could lead the entire league in target share this year. It would not shock me, if Garrett Wilson's up around 30% or something crazy like that. Okay. Another mid-round pick. Maybe we should have included this in the year 2 breakout or not, but this is a mid-round important pick, I think. Xavier Worthy started off slow with his connection with Patrick Mahomes. They were trying to get deep. It felt to me, and Matt can tell us better, felt to me like Xavier Worthy was open a lot in the first half of the year, just could not quite come up with the connection on some of these deep balls from Mahomes. Then late in the year, they start using Xavier Worthy around the line of scrimmage more, get him some screens. He starts playing really well. And then in the Super Bowl, you saw some garbage time connections, etc., deep down the field. Harmon, what did you think of Xavier Worthy's rookie season?
Yeah, full transparency, I struggle with the Chiefs receiver room because I wish they had just like one normal receiver, like one big guy that could win against press man coverage, because they don't. So, and I kind of think this is just classic Andy Reid. Like, he loves these sort of type of wide receivers, but it's just frustrating considering the quarterback that they have. But in fairness, you're right to the one point, Adam, like Xavier Worthy, his best routes last year in terms of getting open was corner, post, 9, and like deeper crossing routes. So he was definitely open, and Mahomes just missed him, or maybe he wasn't quite where Mahomes expected him to be, but he certainly shows an ability, and this dates back to college. Like, the guy can get open down the field, especially from the slot and flanker position, mostly against zone coverage. Like, he definitely, at his size, I think will always just get swallowed up a little bit against press coverage. Well, he's just not an entity against press coverage, 16th percentile, obviously, but he'll get swallowed up against man coverage at times too. That's just going to be part of who he is. The only thing that I think people misunderstand about Xavier Worthy is that, like, he was not put into, quote, the Rashee Rice role at the end of last year. Like, Rice is a guy who like runs a lot of these in-breaking routes. He's a guy that I definitely got wrong as a prospect because I evaluated him as like a perimeter receiver, and they kicked him into being that big slot receiver like I talked about earlier, and he's been awesome against zone coverage. He had in the 3.1 games he played last year, had like a 99th percentile success rate against zone. He was unbelievable, and was just going to smash people in those in-breaking routes. Worthy actually works well on like quicker out routes. He was really good at that towards the end of the year. So they don't necessarily have to, like, from a target competition standpoint, obviously that's something, but like from a role standpoint, they can coexist together once Rice gets back. But I don't know. Worthy, I think, is like, he's an okay player, pretty good. He certainly wins down the field, but I don't think he projects as like a true target hog type of player.
Yeah, his ADP has been rising, Evan. Not that sharply, though, since the news of the Rashee Rice likely suspension. We still don't have the exact number of games on the Rashee Rice suspension yet. Anything to add on Worthy? Evan, you were at 50 overall in your rankings on Worthy.
Yeah, I'm behind on him. Just a lot of moving parts. We still have not figured out how long Rashee Rice is going to be suspended. We're worried that Hollywood Brown's shoulder injury is going to go into the season. Jalen Royals has generated some buzz at Chiefs training camp. I think that he's an interesting guy, but a lot of moving parts. And then, those guys will return. Hollywood and Rashee Rice will return at some point during the season. It's just, it's not a firm situation right now.
Let's go to one of Evan's favorites for this year. Jameson Williams is next up. I think everybody, you'll have to be blind not to see that Jameson Williams is a total freak in terms of speed out there with the ball in his hands. I think people question how much volume can Jameson Williams actually take on here is the only knock on him. Any thoughts on JMO as he heads into what should be a breakout year, Harmon?
I feel like he broke out last year.
Yeah, me too.
Like, that's what's been funny about like them kind of pumping him up. And maybe he's just a guy that needs like that pumping up, right? I think he maybe needs to kind of always have the carrot on the stick and stuff like that. But they've been hyping him up so much. I'm like, damn, you guys did this last year and it already worked. I think he already had the breakout season last year. Just around 80% success rate versus zone coverage. He was pretty solid. Kind of average-ish, a little bit below average against man coverage. He's not the most technically proficient receiver, but really good in the intermediate area. He's actually, his worst route relative to average success rate and reception perception is the 9 route, just the straight up go route, which I think people would think maybe he's really good at because he's a speed guy, but his speed is more so weaponized running crossing routes and digs and deeper posts, stuff that really does overlap well with Jared Goff. I think we all should have questions about what the Lions offense looks like this year. And I do think that, to me, the only thing I would push back on is that some people think he is going to eat into Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just think St. Brown's firmly established as the top target here. That probably isn't going to flip at any point. But Jameson Williams, really good player who showed well, like I said, on out routes and dig routes. 93.3% success rate on the out route is insane. He really weaponizes that ability to throttle down and cross the field on a horizontal 90-degree route. I was really impressed with how he played last year. I don't know that he is I don't know that he's a future number 1 receiver or anything like that, but very good in what he was asked to do for the Lions last year. And I kind of hope they don't change that much, which I would imagine they won't.
Yeah. Evan, we've heard your Jameson Williams take plenty here. You're at 30 overall on Jameson. I just wanted to note, again, for season-long people, you can get him in probably the 60s in your season-long draft, unless there's some Evan fanboys in there. You should be able to get Jameson in the 60s. Evan, anything else to add here on JMO?
Just going to be interesting to see how much they do change. I mean, John Morton has been gushing about Jameson Williams since he got his hands on him a few months back. So, what does that really mean for on the field product? Because John Morton cannot stop talking about this dude.
All right,
and we see him play. He isn't. Yeah. He's one of the most electrifying players in the NFL. So we'll see.
All right. Last one in the mid-round make or break picks category is going to be the player that I actually have the most of so far. I've done about 100 drafts so far. My most owned player is George Pickens. I feel like everybody's in on Pickens this year, so I'm not out on an island or anything like that. Do you think all this hype around George Pickens is warranted, Harmon, as he makes his way from Pittsburgh to Dallas?
We've talked about Pickens over the years, I'm sure. And there's been times where, especially after his rookie year, I was kind of wishy-washy on what his ceiling could be. I think he's the most mispriced player in fantasy this year. I think he should be, I have him probably 12 spots over his consensus rankings right now. I really want to get George Pickens on every draft that I have, which I've never really felt that way about Pickens for a variety of reasons. But the biggest thing is that, to me, I think he took a step last year as a player. It wasn't consistent over the full season because we know the George Pickens experience, right? There was actually, ironically, I said this in the first month of the season, the first 4 weeks, this guy is crushing against man press coverage at a rate that he had not previously reached. He'd always been a solid man beater and really good against press coverage, but he kicked it up another notch at the beginning of last season. Obviously, Justin Fields wasn't always getting him the football, especially on slants. That was something where Pickens has always been good on the deeper routes, outbreaking routes, but to be a true number 1 receiver in the NFL, you do need to win on slants and quick hitters so that we can get the ball in your hands quickly and we can move the offense down the field. Pickens was showing that last year in isolation. Ironically, against the team he now plays for in Dallas, that was where kind of the same old BS sort of cropped into his game where he's loafing on routes. The zone coverage stuff is a mess. But still, when you look over the course of the season, he did take a big step as an individual player last year. And he just wasn't fully locked in all the time. I imagine he's going to be locked in this year. He's in a perfect role for him as the X receiver across from CeeDee Lamb. But I think he showed last year that he can win over the middle of the field more than you think. He doesn't have to just line up at X receiver and run go routes all the time, which is what he was doing in Matt Canada's offense earlier. I think there's going to be a lot of times where CeeDee Lamb is the on-ball slot receiver, and him and Pickens are kind of aligned in a stack, and they'll switch release those guys while Jalen Tolbert or whoever is, just taking safeties off as the sacrificial X on the other side. So I just think Pickens could score 10 plus touchdowns this year. I think he can be the T Higgins to Jamar Chase for this Dallas Cowboys offense. I'm really, really high on what Pickens can do this year. Mostly, again, because he showed last year that he took a step forward. His 83rd percentile success rate versus press. Like, that individual breakout to me is just as important as all the other surrounding factors, which, as you mentioned, Adam, like, everybody's high on that this year.
Right.
I think George Pickens, to me, that's what I'm most excited about, is how many touchdowns can he score? Because his skill set on paper suggests that he should be a dominant red zone, end zone player. He has not been a big-time touchdown scorer in the pros. However, touchdown finishes of 4, 5, and 3. He did, as a freshman at Georgia, when he was 18 years old, score 8 touchdowns on 49 receptions. But he has not been that guy so far in the NFL. I think that he's going to break out and be that this year. I think the Cowboys are going to throw the ball a lot. Dak's going to throw a ton of touchdown passes, and Pickens is a guy who could score 10, 12, 13.
Yeah. Since Pickens came to the league, the Steelers rank 32nd in passing touchdowns. So not a lot of touchdowns to be scored for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, and the other tailwind here is not just Pickens as a player, but what Evan mentioned. We expect the Cowboys to have a very pass-centric offense here this season and get into some wild shootouts, which would obviously be good for Pickens. All right. Last category before we get to Harmon's underrated and overrated is later round veterans. Chris Olave is one that I've been getting a ton of here. Harmon, the bet is very clear. He is so good on a per route basis that any quarterback problems or team problems are already baked into a price where you get Olave in the 70s a lot of the time. Do you think Chris Olave is actually one of the premier wide receivers in the league as his per route data suggests?
Yeah, I think the guys of all the players we've talked about so far, like the two that I think people think and are misevaluating them as like actively bad receivers because they've let them down in fantasy are like Jalen Waddle and Chris Olave. Like, I was surprised when I started talking about Olave this offseason, how much pushback like I got that he sucks, which is just crazy because, as you mentioned, like, he is productive and he is proven as a per route one of the best receivers in the NFL. First downs per route run, yards per route run, all that stuff, like successful targets per route run. He's, since he entered the league, one of the most productive receivers in those metrics, and like that bears out like on film. That's not fluky. 87th percentile success rate versus man last year, 81st against zone, 82nd against press. Like, he's a real deal receiver that I think you could funnel an entire passing game through. And I just think he's been very unlucky. Like, his chemistry with Derek Carr has never been that good. Carr is a guy who just a weird, like, kind of quarterback in general. They've also, prior to last year, run kind of like a very archaic offense down there in New Orleans. So last year, Olave was primarily the outside on the line of scrimmage player running a career high amount of in-breaking routes, which I think suited his skill set really well. But it just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. I'm really excited, especially after going back and charting Devontae Smith from last year. Smith was a guy who was almost always an outside on the line of scrimmage player, and then Kellen Moore takes him and has him run 40% from the slot. Mm-hmm. I think Olave would crush in that type of deployment. I think Rashid Shaheed, by the way, who is a very, very, very good player, would crush in that kind of deployment as well in two very different ways. But just, again, the route tree that Devontae Smith had last year, the deployment that he had, I think that fits really well for Chris Olave. It's just obvious questions about the ecosystem, but I have like zero questions about Olave as a player. I think in the right circumstance, he could be an extremely like fantasy relevant wide receiver.
I think that's huge for Chris Olave if that happens. I mean, to get him more, so we're worried about the quarterback situation, right? To get him more layup targets in the middle of the field on high percentage stuff, that could go a really long way when we're dealing with Tyler Shuck or Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler. I mean, we kind of need that to happen for Chris Olave to be a hit in this environment.
Yeah, and they play in a dome. They have Kellen Moore, who's going to play really fast and play pass-centric. Like, you can say a lot of good things about Chris Olave at his cost, except for concussion history and quarterback play, but that's why he's so cheap. Let's go to Jauan Jennings. So kind of a weird career arc for Jauan Jennings to the point where he breaks out last season and his per route metrics were actually really, really good. I think there's some people out there that are like, man, that was kind of fluke. He was propped up by XYZ. He's in a Kyle Shanahan offense. Is Jauan Jennings actually good? I know we already touched on him a little bit with the Ricky Pearsall stuff here, Harmon, but any more thoughts on Jauan Jennings?
Yeah, the per route zealots love Jauan
Yeah.
Jennings, and I think he's good. I think he's a good player. He is somebody that showed like kind of to be I would say more average separator, but he does because he's not going to win downfield. He's not going to win on like these quick routes, but when he gets some build up speed on posts, digs, outs, and even like working back to the quarterback on curls and comebacks, like he does show really well on those handful of routes. There's just clear holes in his game as well. But for what he lacks is kind of an explosive separation player. He makes up for in reliability, great hands, in contested situations too. Like in the sample of games I charted him, he has an 81.8% contested catch rate while seeing a lot of contested targets because I think Brock Purdy was really comfortable like just putting it in his vicinity. He also was really good after the catch as well. Again, not going to be like Deebo Samuel stacking a bunch of explosive plays after the catch, but he'll make the first guy miss and get that first down. Like his reputation as a third down maven receiver is really well earned. So I think he fits in, and it's also really good that he can play all three positions, like showing last year that he's mostly been like kind of a power slot receiver. Then he played some X last year. Like obviously if Ayuk is back and he's at full strength, which who the hell knows when that's going to happen. I think Ayuk is like a top 10 receiver in the league, and you obviously want him playing that X receiver position. Jennings can be your flanker slot. Pearsall can be flanker slot. Like that's a pretty interesting wide receiver room, but I think Jennings is a nice player. I just think that the ceiling is sort of like we've seen what that is.
Yeah, I've been kind of lukewarm on Jauan Jennings also. Evan, anything to add on Jennings here?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right. Packers wide receiver. Honestly, man, I'm like already tired of this story. And I usually don't get tired of stories until September, October. I'm already tired of this. Who's in two wide receiver sets? Oh, you're an idiot. You don't think that Jayden Reed's good or he can't be good in fantasy because he doesn't play him too. It's like everybody's got to chill on the Packers usage stuff. I know I'm probably, it's like the hot dog meme. I know I'm like fanning the flames of this also here for sure. But we saw it again in the scrimmage, Harmon. Jayden Reed, whatever family night or whatever the Packers had, did not get any outside reps. It's going to keep his route numbers capped if he never gets out wide. But, man, he continues to put up numbers even in this role that he's in. What do you think about Jayden Reed? And then I also want to get your Matthew Golden take here also.
Yeah, two things before talking specifically about Jayden Reed. Number one, if you think you're tired of the Packers receivers, like for 2 years running, it's been like the receiver room we've talked the most about on Reception Perception Show, to the point that like it's an active bit now because our subscribers have been like, enough already with the Packers wide receivers. But you can't help it because it's it is an interesting room to talk about. And I so agree with what you said that like, am I allowed to acknowledge the importance of the two receiver set thing while also thinking we've like way jumped the shark on talking about it constantly? Like they're going to play 11 personnel a ton. Like Jayden Reed's going to be on the field a lot. I get that he might always have a capped ceiling because of that, but still, like this is a guy that I mean I just think it is a really, really good player and like somebody I want to bet on. Like I think the one troubling thing for Reed is that he didn't take like a second year jump in reception perception. His numbers actually across the board basically stayed the same, but those numbers were really awesome. Like the leap for these guys can come in year 3. And we see that sometimes. I mean, Olave, who we just talked about, like he's one of those guys that took like kind of the jump more. And so in year 3, Garrett Wilson, another guy, took like more of a jump in year 3. So like it can still happen, but this is a guy that beats man coverage, 72.9% success rate versus man. Like I don't get the Packers like insistence to not play him outside. I actually hope that Matthew Golden being there can take away some of like the full speed motion stuff from Reed, because I think you could see that he was gassed. Like we got to remember these guys are, for all the orbit motion, full speed motion stuff, like they're running like 100 miles in the backfield, before the play even starts over the course of the year. But I think Reed's an awesome player. Like he wins at all 3 levels. He's awesome on the crossing routes, man beater, zone beater, flashes an ability to beat press coverage when he shows. So I just have never really gotten why he's viewed as this like slot only gadget guy. He's awesome after catch. He's explosive. The only thing with him that is a little bit frustrating is obviously he had the drops last year, but the thing that makes that maybe you can excuse it and also makes it even more frustrating is that my biggest criticism of him as a prospect and then after his rookie season is like I want him to be a better finisher at the catch point, and he took a huge jump as a contested catch receiver but then dropped a bunch of layup passes. So you're hoping that can normalize, right? It's a different than a guy like Dontavian Wicks who can't win contested catches and drops the football all the time. Or Quentin Johnston can't win contested catches and drops the football all the time. So I don't think Reed has bad hands. He's somebody I really do want to bet on. And in terms of Matthew Golden, definitely a guy that I think fits really well in this receiver room. They needed a lid lifter. All the talk of like they don't have a number one wide receiver. They need a number one wide receiver. Easier said than done finding that guy. But I think what they needed was somebody to win against man coverage and like win on these downfield routes. I do think that Golden fits well there. He is a good contested catch receiver as well. Will drop some layup passes. So I think the right move in fantasy is to take both of these guys. Like I think where they go, take them both. But Reed is a player that was really, really high on as a prospect because of his route running. And I think it's been sort of underutilized so far in the NFL.
And both these guys are going to go reasonably late here in season long. I did want to note one thing about the schedule, and I don't want to get bent out of shape about this, but it is a very difficult fantasy playoff schedule for the Packers. And as I get a ton of Packers stacks, as I like Golden, I like Reed, I'm fine with Kraft, I like Romeo Doubs also. I get a bunch of this, but I just wanted to note, week 15, 16, 17, home versus Bears. I'm sorry, at Broncos, at Bears versus Ravens. So certainly like a very difficult path there in 15, 16, 17 for Packers pass game. Evan, anything to add here on Packers stuff?
I mean, I'll just ask, Matt Harmon, do you think that Matthew Golden has like number one receiver capability? He weighs 191 pounds and he wasn't super productive in college. Obviously he's a first round pick. That's nice. They have an opening for a number one. I mean, do you think that he can be like a big time volume earner?
My thought process on Matthew Golden as a prospect, I did really like him. I thought he was a guy that you can take in the first round, but he was like 50th percentile against press, much more of a zone beater, and not great on sort of these like some of these like quicker routes where I do think that Jayden Reed is the guy there, but he is a real deal. Like he'll run great dig routes and post routes, which is a staple of this offense. So he fits the offense well. I did not see him as like a future number one receiver. I saw him as more of like a really, really, really good, like high end at best, number two receiver, sort of like a Jordan Addison type of player, where another guy that I don't think is a number one, but I think is really well cast as a solid number two.
All right. As promised, before we get out of here, I want to get to Matt's most underrated and overrated wide receivers in the NFL. Let's see who you're going to offend here first, Matt. If we want to start with the overrated, I hope these guys do not see you in the Yahoo Fantasy podcast streets. Who do you consider the most overrated wide receivers in the NFL?
Yeah, number one has to be DK Metcalf. I have always liked DK Metcalf as a player, but he is coming off his worst season last year, and that was the true even before he kind of got banged up. His ability to win in contested situations has really fallen off the last few seasons. And again, like his zone coverage numbers were way below what you want. His man coverage numbers took a step back. And I think he actually, when he got traded to the Steelers and Arthur Smith's offense, I know everybody hates Arthur Smith, but I think like what he does with X receivers, like running these in-breaking routes, like 44% of Drake London's routes is his rookie year, George Pickens' routes last year, and A.J. Brown when he was with Arthur Smith in Tennessee, like 44% dig, post, slant, like these in-breaking routes. I actually think that fits well with what DK does. I don't think he's great on these routes like the stop routes and coming back to football where Ryan Grubb kind of had him as the X receiver last year. The problem is, though, I mentioned this earlier, like Rodgers was horrible throwing those like deeper and intermediate in-breaking passes last year. This is a guy who doesn't want to get hit, so I've not been all that jazzed up about DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers pairing up together. And again, Metcalf just is not coming off a very good season, and I think that contract has sort of thrown things off for Terry McLaurin there. Another overrated guy to me is Jerry Jeudy, who I think has been one of the more overrated receivers in the NFL of late. He had a nice season with the Browns last year, and I will actually give both him and the Browns a lot of credit that they got the usage right for him. It drove me crazy watching Jerry Jeudy. He's one of the worst zone beating receivers in the league. He has no consistency in settling down in the right places, play like a high volume slot role for the Broncos. Like they got him as more of a flanker running these deeper in breaking routes. He's not the like route technician that people think. He's more of like a speed guy who like one cut and he can snap that off and break inside, which is a great fit for Jameis Winston. But I think when we go back and look at the weeks where it was post Deshaun Watson and pre Cedric Tillman getting that concussion, like their production was pretty similar. And I like Tillman as a player. And I actually think that Tillman's a guy who fits well as an X receiver and could be productive in the right situation. Maybe not like a future superstar, but kind of gives me like super like poor man's Cortland Sutton type vibes. A little bit like not the ceiling of Nico Collins, but a guy who can play X and beat man coverage at around 70% in a poor offense. That was kind of the case I was making for Nico Collins, 3-4 years ago or whatever. So I'm not like super bullish on any of these players. And I would just, if I'm taking either in fantasy, like I'm not really trying to get shots on the Cleveland Browns anyways, I would just take Cedric Tillman in the double digit like rounds.
Yep. I like that take for sure. I should note that The Athletic is reporting, or at least speculating, that Joe Flacco is now the quote unquote strong favorite to open the year as a starter, which would obviously be good for Judy and all these other guys, or at least better than Pickett or Shador or Dylan Gabriel. Evan, any thoughts on DK Metcalf and Jerry Jeudy making Harmon's most overrated list?
No, I want to hear his underrated.
Okay. The moment everybody's been waiting for, Harmon. Your underrated NFL wide receivers for 2025.
Yeah, number one, I'll go veteran to start, Calvin Ridley. Listen, this guy had 1,000 yards and was productive against man coverage in a horrific situation with the Titans last year. And a lot of like downfield shots, but I think when you watch him last year, you go back and look at reception perception, 85th percentile against press, 75th percentile against man, really bounced back from like a volatile season, like his first season back in the NFL after being away for a year and a half with the Jaguars last year. Also, my biggest criticism and why it was so volatile in Jacksonville was they primarily ran him out as the boundary X receiver. And like, this is the bull case for like Marvin Harrison Jr. You see like that. And that's like, these are actually kind of similar players in terms of just they don't look the same, but like route running wise, they're kind of similar. Calvin Ridley moves from a primary X receiver role where he was 78.8% on the line of scrimmage, 81.8 outside with the Jaguars. And he goes into being kind of like 50-50 on the line of scrimmage as like the flanker / X at times. And it was really beneficial for him as a player. And he wins on dig routes, slant routes, and like Cam Ward's numbers. We do quarterback not me. I got enough going on. But Corey Kinnan does quarterback charting for us at reception perception. Those were some of his like best routes were where Calvin Ridley won versus what Cam Ward liked to do in college. So I'm super high on that connection. If Cam Ward's any good, Calvin Ridley is going to outproduce his ADP in fantasy. The other guy that this is tough because he plays for the damn Colts and like, what the hell is the quarterback situation going to be there? But Josh Downs is just such a good NFL receiver. He reminds me a lot of Tyler Lockett. So he's not just like some pop gun slot receiver. It's a guy that can win all over the field. He was awesome against press coverage last year while seeing more press coverage reps because teams did not respect the Colts passing game for good reason. He's a ball winner in tight coverage. I just want to bet on that guy, even if obviously the situation's a little tough there.
Yeah. Calvin Ridley's one where I try to take a ton of Calvin Ridley. I like Calvin Ridley. He goes in that range where I take so many wide receivers and I have some trouble parsing between them. I'm talking Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Devonta Smith, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle. Like I am always taking wide receiver in that range, at least on DraftKings where it's full PPR so often. And I'm trying to get a lot of Calvin Ridley in there. It's just hard because I like the other guys also a ton as well. Evan, any thoughts on Ridley and Josh Downs as Harmon?
I just love the way that Cam Ward has been talking about Calvin Ridley so far. Like it sounds like they're really on the same page so far in training camp. Cam Ward's like, this is a special guy.
Yeah.
And Calvin Ridley, I mean, the tape aficionados have been saying that about Calvin Ridley for a long time. I mean, I remember early in his career, Greg Cosell was all over Calvin Ridley. Wow, this guy has incredible separation skills.
Yeah.
Love to hear about the bounce back last year despite the atrocious quarterback play. And now he's got the number 1 overall pick thrown to him.
Yeah.
And with Josh Downs, it comes down to quarterback play. Like I would rather have Daniel Jones in there. That's not to say that Daniel Jones is some stud or anything like that, but Anthony Richardson completing 49% of his passes. That isn't going to work.
All right. As always, this was a fascinating episode with Matt Harmon. Matt, tell the people where they can find you and find your work.
Yeah, all of the wide receiver content talked about here, receptionperception.com. We have a ton of tiers of subscriptions too, so it's kind of something for everybody there. James Coe and I also host a podcast, Reception Perception, the show. So search that anywhere you find your podcasts. Also, all my work at Yahoo is over there as well. I host Football 301 with Nate Tyson, Charles McDonald, but 5 days a week, fantasy football show, Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. So if you like this show, you'll like that show. We're live 5 p.m. pretty much every day for the rest of my life. But no, 5 days a week for the rest of the until your fantasy championships. So we just launched a new YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can search Yahoo Fantasy Football and find it there.
All right. Be sure to check out all of Matt's excellent work. For Silva, for Harmon, producer Ryan, producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.